Welcome to My Music Teaching. In this clip, we're going to look at how to create an invoice for a student. Let's start in My Students because step 1 is actually to set up the student's invoice rule. For the purpose of this demonstration, we've created 3 students, Fred Future, Nigel Next Month, and Peter Past. Let's look at Fred Future. Fred's first and last name go in the appropriate fields. Then the billing email address is where invoices will be sent to. This automatically shows your email address as the teacher, but you can change it to the student's email address if you would like invoices to be sent directly to the student. The last important feature is the invoice option. For Fred, the selection is Invoice Everything in Advance. This means that when you do an invoice run, every lesson and item for that student will be added to the invoice, except of course for lessons and items that have already been invoiced. Looking at Nigel next month, his selection is to invoice only lessons for the next month. This means only lessons and items that have occurred in the past or which will occur in the next month will be added to the invoice. For example, this clip is being recorded in December, so the invoices will include all lessons and items up to the end of January. Lastly, Peter Past. Peter's selection is to invoice lessons only once held. This is as easy as it sounds. Only items and lessons that occur on or before today will be added to the invoice. One last thing to note before we move on from My Students. Each student shows $0 owing and has a need invoicing status of no. Let's look at invoicing in action. Going to My Lessons, we can see that I've just created 3 lessons, November, January, and February. For each lesson, all 3 students are showing as attending. In My Lessons, you can see that each lesson has a status of not invoiced yet. Okay, back in My Students. Because there are now lessons that can be added to invoices, each student has been updated with a status of need invoicing to yes. However, $0 is owing because the students don't actually owe any money until they are given a bill. Now, we could go back to My Lessons and create an invoice for each lesson, one at a time. But it's much better to put everything onto one invoice per student. There are 2 ways to do an invoice run. Option 1 is to invoice each student one at a time by clicking the Invoice button next to the student's name. However, we're going to do option 2, which is to create invoices for all students at one time. Start by clicking the Invoice All Students button and confirm by clicking the Execute button to proceed. The message confirms which invoices are created. If a student has no items or lessons to be invoiced, then no invoice is created for that student. However, for us, all 3 students have invoices. Back in My Students, all 3 students now have a needs invoicing status of no, because all the eligible items and lessons have been added to invoices. The second thing to see is that each student now shows an amount owing. The amounts are different because each student has been invoiced for a different number of lessons based on their invoice option selection. Now, if we go to My Lessons, we can see that the invoice status for each lesson has changed. The November lesson is fully invoiced, which means that that lesson has been included on invoices for all the students who are attending. However, the January and February lessons show as partially invoiced. For example, in January, Peter Past won't have this lesson on an invoice yet because he only is invoiced after the lesson has actually occurred. Let's go to My Invoices and check out the invoices themselves. First, Fred Future. Fred has been invoiced for all 3 lessons, and they are showing on the one invoice. Second, going to Nigel next month. I'm making this clip in December, so Nigel has only been invoiced up to the end of January, which includes just the November and January lessons. Lastly, Peter Past has only been invoiced for the lesson that has already happened. This clip is recorded in December, so that's only the November lesson which has already occurred. And there you have it. This is probably the trickiest part of my music teaching, but once you have the hang of it, this will save you lots of time. Welcome.